The CyberHub Engage podcast is sponsored by CyberHub Summit. CyberHub Summit is hosting an executive retreat summit March 2nd through the 4th in Napa Valley. Apply today at cyberhubsummit.com. Hey everyone, welcome in and thanks for tuning into the CyberHub Engage podcast. I am James Azar, your host, and if you're listening today, that means one, you've got a long drive ahead of you, and number two, you're interested in cybersecurity. And so being that you're both, I've got a great show lined up for you today. But before we get started, again, engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, at CyberHub Engage. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Remember our deal. 5,000 subscribers, I get new people on Twitter, and we're going to get right into our show today. And I'm sitting with Larry Williams, who is the Executive Director for the Technology Association of Georgia. Hey, Larry, how's it going?
Doing great, James. How are you?
It's Monday.
It's Monday. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. We are recording this on Monday. It is the start of Atlanta Cyber Week. It is October 8th. So for those listening, Larry, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Technology Association of Georgia is and a little bit about yourself as well?
Oh, sure, James. Thanks. And thanks for coming over on this wonderful Monday morning.
Hey, no traffic today. It's Columbus Day.
Exactly. Good time to travel. So I'm the president and CEO of the Technology Association of Georgia. We call it TAG. And what we are is we're the largest technology association, statewide technology association in the country. We have about 35,000 members, primarily across the state of Georgia. And our real role is about how do we build the community? How do we connect the community of technologists and people that are really interested in fueling the innovation economy, both here in Georgia and beyond? And we do so in multiple ways. One is we do things through several meetings, meetups, large conferences that we do across the year. Probably do about 300 of them. And that's a lot of events and ways for people to get engaged and connected.
You guys do 300 events, but my understanding when, obviously we're members of TAG, and so you guys have different societies as well. So you guys are really broken down into, the different societies. How many societies does TAG have today?
So we have 27 societies, and that's great. So a great way for us to explain how we're organized. And through the societies, our societies are broken down into three areas. So one is industry, like cybersecurity, InfoSec. Almost if there's a buzzword out there, we probably have a society around it. So FinTech, health IQ, you got it, all of it. The other is through function. So we also, for technologists, we think about sales leadership, business process development, corporate development, marketing. All of these things are important for technologists as well. And then the third category is people. So think about women in technology, think about diversity and inclusion, think about young professionals and how we develop that next generation of expertise and how we're all building all of that and connecting them to the community as well. So that's how we really implement and organize around those 300 events that we're talking about. And as I say, remember, there are 250 business days in the year. So that's a very active calendar that we manage throughout the year. But in addition to connecting the community through all of our events, we also work very hard about promoting the great innovation and technology ecosystem that we have throughout the state of Georgia. There's still a lot of people that, enjoy learning about all the did you knows and where Georgia leads in technology. And there's some great stories there. We influence a lot of policies, so we are constantly lobbying both at the state and federal levels. And then we're very involved in education. So everything from developing STEM education in schools, so developing the longer part of the pipeline so that we have the workforce and the bright people to continue to not only work at the companies we have, but the people who are going to think about that, next generation of ingenuity, the next big idea, the next innovation that's going to keep Georgia at the forefront of the innovation economy.
Georgia is the FinTech capital of the country.
That's correct.
TAG is, you guys do FinTech South, which is probably the largest FinTech show in the Southeast.
Definitely.
How does that play into cybersecurity? Where do you see, obviously that's where criminals go to. They go to the financial sector because that's the easiest place to go. Where do you see that playing, based on what you hear as the CEO of TAG?
they're hand in hand, right?
Right.
So one thing that I've learned in life, if there's one truism for all people, is everyone likes to get paid,
Right.
including the criminals.
Yes.
So go to where the money is. And so they are very bright. They're very aggressive. They're very nimble. And so anything they can do to infiltrate or disrupt our payment process is a win for them. So sometimes the criminals, as I mentioned before, they want to get paid.
Right.
And we know all of that. But there are other, malicious intent as well, and that's just to disrupt. And if you disrupt a country's financial systems and the whole infrastructure, then that can be a win for them as well. So cybersecurity goes hand in hand with financial, because we have to protect both the security of our systems, the integrity of those systems, as well as the privacy of people that are using them.
What are TAG's goals in information security to its members? What are some of the commitments you guys make towards some of your members today?
One is to connect the industry so that we're sharing information. So technologists are talking to technologists and sharing the appropriate information so that we can also learn from each other. One of the biggest challenges that we have is staying ahead of the bad guys. The bad guys are nimble. The bad guys aren't regulated. Right. The bad guys can sit there, didn't work, they can drop, turn, and, come up with the next thing. We've got to stay constantly vigilant, trying to stay ahead of them or catch up with them, but in a very quick and real-time way. So part of it is just connecting that industry of technologists so that we understand what the innovation is. The other is, how do we connect to the broader community? Let them know what the opportunities and risks are for them to be able to manage in this world. And some are more embedded and more in tuned with what they need to do than others. And so we are definitely providing education and awareness to people, and really, taking it to the C-suite as well. So what is it that this is not just an IT issue anymore? This is a marketing, PR, communications issue. This is obviously the integrity. This is a critical, critical infrastructure. This is basic
national security.
It gets into all of those, yeah. And it's a C-level conversation. And so I was thinking about our memberships in particular. So we're connecting, the community itself to technologists and innovators. We're connecting to the broader community as well, and then we're also connecting the ecosystem. So what's happening in research, in academia, what's happening with the private sector, what's going on in government. All of these things are very important about how we connect this ecosystem so that we can have these conversations and really think about the deep, rich industry. And we should talk about that in a minute. Where Georgia has been and how Georgia's been involved in this for decades.
Right. There's a lot of truth to what you say, simply because the conversation really needs to go up to the C-suite, right? So
has to be. Chief
information security officers already know the problem. I know we haven't really talked about it, but you guys really launched a national body. The National Technology Security Coalition is a national arm of TAG to address cybersecurity challenges on the Hill.
That's correct. So we saw this about 2 years ago, the obvious trend that was going on, and the need within the CISO community in this part to be able to get connected, start to share information, but also start to influence federal policies, because there's got to be a rationalization and awareness of cybersecurity. And so a couple of things that we found when we were doing this is that our CISOs, they care about a multitude of things, including they care about their customers and the security, the cybersecurity and privacy as their products and services that they deliver affect their customers. They care about the data integrity for their company, and they care about national security, and they're willing to be part of the solution and work with our federal government, our state governments, to make sure that we can have a great defense and a great offense when necessary to be able to protect those systems.
Yeah, the NTSC vision that was started, and it's now headed by Patrick, who was already on the podcast.
Patrick Gall.
Yeah, we speak to Patrick quite often.
He's a smart guy.
He is. And just for the record, for the sake of a conflict of interest, I am on the board of advisors for the NTSC. So I do promote the organization, but I'm not paid to do so. Just so for all of our listeners to know that and understand it. Just because I always get
and
called
you give great advice. You give great advice.
I always get called out on Twitter. You're promoting someone. How much are they paying you? And I'm like, we don't get paid to do this. This is it's actually a larger
you
mission.
pay us.
Yeah, it's a larger mission, and it's a mission of really setting policy and getting the right people heard on the Hill, which is very hard to do sometimes because the conversation typically is being led by people who have a financial interest by regulation rather than the people who have to deal with the aftermath of it. And we saw that with GDPR. It was led by privacy companies rather than the people who actually have to execute it. And the results of that, obviously, in organizations is tremendous. TAG's really successful in Georgia. It's the largest technology association, I think, in the country, if I'm not mistaken.
Statewide.
You guys are statewide. You guys have offices in Columbus, Augusta, now Alpharetta, and you guys are expanding. You're hitting every single ecosystem. How does cyber play a role in your expansion, and what are some of the activities and societies that are out there that really, do you see more activity in different places, or is it pretty evened out?
Listen, cybersecurity touches everything and everywhere right now. I mean, it is such an important part. Whenever I was describing about how we're organized in industry sectors and cybersecurity is in that industry sector,
Right.
It is, but it's also a matrix.
Right.
It cuts across everything, every other industry and everything that we do. So we've got to look at it from that point of view. Now, Georgia is very, very, very important in this. We've been a part of the cybersecurity back when it was network security, internet security, all of the different terms. And as we think about a lot of work that we've done through our universities, especially just right here at Georgia Tech, as well as with the Department of Defense, again pulling in the private sector, we've created great companies that have grown up here around cybersecurity. ISS, for one, that was later acquired by IBM,
Right.
and still running strong here in Georgia. SecureWorks, acquired by Dell, continuing to be very relevant here and part of that evolution of the industry. And then
There's Pindrop, OneTrust. I mean, you name
go
it.
on.
You can
AirWatch.
go on. You're right.
AirWatch, and it's a good story. And I think, because AirWatch was really, what really made it big is it was the first security application that the iPhone led onto its platform.
Right.
And so keep that in mind. When that happened, they pretty much put the BlackBerry out of business.
Pretty much.
RIM's still going strong. They still got some things, but people chose the iPhone and that device over the BlackBerry. In fact, they were on the cover of Maclean's magazine in Canada,
Right.
saying the company that put BlackBerry out of business. So, but my main point about this is the reason that AirWatch was able to grow up here is because of that evolution of innovation, that evolution of know-how that grew up here and kept up with the times. So everything from what ISS was doing to the mobile security that AirWatch was doing, that was, 15-year gap, maybe a 20-year gap that all of this happened. But Georgia has continued to keep up with the trends about where security is going and why it's relevant here. So it's extremely, extremely important. So which was another factor that led us to the NTSC. And this is important because it does start to get intersected, a huge intersection with what we think about what our three policy measures are at the NTSC.
Right.
So one of them is national data breach notification. And I mentioned that rationalization of federal policies. Now there are multiple federal agencies that claim jurisdiction over data breach, national data breach. Companies cannot manage to that. It's impossible.
Well, it puts companies out of businesses.
Well, it
Small,
can.
medium-sized companies go out.
And so, if the standard of the federal government is you're out of compliance if you're breached, that means that every company is out of compliance or will be,
Right.
most likely. So it's impossible to manage to. We need a rationalization with some experts, by experts, that really understand this. And again, that care. They care about national security, not just their self-interest. So that's a very important part for us. The other is active cyber defense. We can't just always be back on our heels, waiting for the next punch, for the bad guys. We talked about it earlier, right?
We did that for 8 years.
We've done that for 8 years. We've got to be much more active about what we're doing to protect our networks and the data within. So extremely, extremely important for us. And then also the information sharing and the information exchange that we have between the private sector and the government. We have to have better communications, and we've got to be able to let that information flow back and forth. And James, you're an expert in this, and you know how it works.
So just for our listeners to reference, 3 of those topics we've covered on our show extensively. So data notification breach, Patrick and I had an entire discussion. You can go back to, I think it's episode 7 or 8. Micah's not with me today. Otherwise, he'd remind me right now what episode it was. But we did talk about national data breach notification. Jeff Hancock and myself have done multiple episodes on active cyber defense. And for listeners who are listening who want to understand the difference between what active cyber defense is and hackbacks, we really kind of lay that out. And finally, information sharing. I had John Felker on, and that was the podcast that was released a few weeks ago. I think it's the episode from last week where you can listen to what John talks about in information security, and he's the director of the NKIC. And I reference all that simply because the top 3 agenda items for every CISO is those 3. 50 different data breach notification laws to deal with 50 different states. You got to deal with 50 attorney generals. If you're not a large company, you don't have the resource to deal with it. And when the breach happens, you're not going to pay the legal fees to deal with it. You're just going to fold the shop and just say, hey, we're out of business. We're just going to claim our insurance policy and let it be. Because even insurance policies for most small, medium-sized businesses don't cover the bill.
You're exactly right. And even cybersecurity insurance today, which is becoming a more popular offering, it's still not clear when they pay and when they don't. Even more nebulous than some insurance policies. It's more traditional.
It's actually really fascinating. So the CFO, who's typically in charge of buying insurance policies, will rarely incorporate a chief information security officer in the cyber buying process. So he will typically look at he will ask the chief information security officer to fill out a worksheet, and he will then pick a randomly policy, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, and that's that. So just to kind of give you a hint of this, Maersk, when they were victims of WannaCry last year, the shipping company, they went 18 days without operating their business.
$5 million doesn't cover that, does it?
Neither does 20.
Neither does 20.
They lost $1.7 billion in revenue in 2017 because of WannaCry. A $50,000, 1 Bitcoin at the time, whatever it was like 1 Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoins is what they were asking for, cost that company $1.7 billion in revenue loss. That's insane.
Insane.
Now they're a $50 billion a year company, but $1.7 billion is how you get fired.
High operating costs in a shipping company too.
Yes. You were talking about how cybersecurity plays a role in every single society. What are some of the trends you're seeing from different societies in addressing cybersecurity? Are you seeing more cyber specific to maybe healthcare and fintech, or is it still being very broad? Because cyber used to be very broad, and you still see that today, right? In conferences, it's very broad. Let's talk about the risks and the threats, but no one's really addressing a criteria in healthcare, in fintech. Are you starting to see the societies in tech kind of grasp the concept of cyber per society?
Well, yes and no. Okay. So there's still a very broad. I mean, one thing about our society is it is mainly technologists. Mm-hmm. So we're not starting at this isn't the 101 level class. This is graduate level, PhD level conversations that we're having. So it is much more of a segmentation, as you suggest, that there are different flavors for different industries. So what is cybersecurity? So obviously a lot of commonality. A lot of security, just locking down networks, whether it apply to, digital health versus our fintech, very similar things that have to happen. But then there's also, as you get into the regulatory environment of a healthcare company versus the regulatory environment of a financial company, all of these start to take on different shades and different hues that really people are starting to dig into and understand better about how these are applicable.
You're a CEO and an executive director of an organization that has 35,000 members, obtains a lot of information. How do you, for our listeners to understand kind of, you're more educated in cyber than another CEO per se. How concerned are you about cyber personally, for in terms of tag and in terms of just as you see it kind of impacting the ecosystem here with, Atlanta's a hotbed for breaches, unfortunately. The city of Atlanta, Equifax, Home Depot, Delta, to name, some of our larger companies here, including not some of the small ones. How concerned are you with cyber?
Well, very. And we should all be, both at a personal level as well as at a corporate level and at a society, at a national defense. It's a whole new world. I moderated a panel about, say 5 years ago, where I had two large Fortune 100 companies on the panel, and then a startup guy. I'll say a startup guy from Austin. And, I asked that question to them. What are you doing to, provide, security and privacy to your customers? And the first big company says, well, at my company, we care deeply about security and privacy, and we do the utmost. Second large company. At my company, we care very deeply about security and privacy for our company,
the scripted
and
answers.
we do the utmost. And then the startup guy from Austin says, privacy's dead. And if you think differently, you're really just fooling yourself. And I look over at the other two people, and they're staring at their shoes. Don't make eye contact. Okay. Fast forward 5 years. Imagine same panel, same two large companies, different startup dude from Austin. Same conversation, same question, same answers from the big guys, same answer from the startup guy. The only thing difference is the two folks with the big companies, they were no longer staring at their shoes. They'd given the party line, but they were looking up and nodding their heads in the affirmative. It's a different world. We have to think about active defense. We have to think about our personal data, what's happening to it. So everything about, changing the passwords, changing the access, making sure that we are actively defending ourselves and our data is very important. I mean, how often do we go on to banking? Now, having said that, we're all out there now. Our data's out there. Our information is out there. It's easy to find information about people, and you have to be very selective about what you want people to see. Some you don't have a choice at this stage, and then some others you can start to pull it back. But then that goes up into what the large companies are dealing with, as well as the small and medium-sized companies, because these can be real deal breakers for companies. So just going back, so what we're trying to do is provide education, provide awareness, and provide the tools. So let's just go beyond education and awareness, but really tools that companies can use and take back to their companies and actually implement so that they can actually stay at the forefront of what the trends are. Because this is changing daily, James. You know this. I mean, this is not a, at a blink of an eye, it changes.
It's the next threat. I mean, it's from hardware to software to intrusions. What knowledge do you wish every executive had in cyber? And I know this is really general, right? And it's kind of picking on you, Larry, on this one, and just being like, if you could get in the ear of every single CEO and whisper something in their ear about cybersecurity, what would you whisper?
It's real. It's real, and it needs your attention. You are going to be the one.
Give me goosebumps on that one.
Okay. You're going to, buck stops with you, CEO. And, this isn't this is no longer, you gave the perfect example with Maersk, and there are other ones, not to pick on Maersk. It can happen, and it can happen to you, and it's going to affect, it's no longer just, hey, we lost a few account numbers. That's real revenue. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost your stockholders money.
It's going to cost your job.
It's going to cost you your job. It's going to cost, your board of directors. We've said take it to the C-suite. I think you got to take it to the board of directors. They need to know what your plan is. And so let's flip that conversation a little bit.
Do it.
So let's think about people that are being very proactive about it, that are very much doing it and have that awareness and have that level of insight about not only what companies need to be doing, but what they're doing about it and how they can communicate that not only within the C-suite, but down the ranks of their employees, the consumer-facing organizations, whether consumer-facing or if they're B2B, being able to communicate that, and then also to the board of directors, and then also to shareholders. I mean, companies now and people that are investing, they want to know, what are you doing to protect our interests across the board?
That is so true. Board of directors, in fact, I was at a board meeting about 2 weeks ago, and I was brought in by someone who is a board member of this company. And he goes, listen, I want you there. We're speaking to the chief information officer and chief information security officer, and I'd like you to be my whisperer, per se, in terms of questions. And so I said, let's allow every other board member to kind of lead, and we will do the supplemental questions just to see where we'll get a feel of the room. We also don't want to put those two individuals on the spot in front of everyone. We figured we'd I guess I called them the easy questions, get out of the way, and then we'll kind of get into the more technical aspect of it. What I've noticed, and some of my takeaways, and I'm actually writing a blog on this, and I'm going to post it out, was is board members are asking the very basic: do we have an incident response plan? Do we have cyber insurance? What are our contingencies? Which cloud service are we using? How secure is it? So they're asking these general questions.
Do we have a cryptocurrency account?
Yeah. Do we own Bitcoins? Yeah. Should we buy them now while they're cheap before they get too expensive again? And then there's the questions that we kind of put together for them. And I was I was putting on the questions. I was writing the questions as the other board's members were talking, and I reached out to the CISO and I asked them this one simple question. I go, with the budget you currently have and with the tools currently at your expense, if you worked 250 days a year, how many of those nights are you sleeping good? And he went, none. And he goes, I don't sleep all 365 days a year. And he goes, and here are our challenges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He listed, I believe, 12 different challenges that exist currently for that information security organization within that company. Beyond that, the look on every other board member's face at that point was, holy smokes. And then the question came from someone else that said, well, what do we need to do? So they were asking the questions for, I want to go the sake of record, the sake of, we've checked our boxes. But no one's really digging deep in the board to ask the question of, what tools do you need to be successful at your job?
Yeah. Now, there are some that are doing it, and we get reports. I get reports from, more anecdotes of,
right.
People in charge of this, mainly CISOs, but other people that are in charge of networks. I have one company that, very successful company, where this person has gone several times into their board of directors, given the presentation, and then had the budget request, and basically has, giving them the 1 scoop, 2 scoop, 3 scoop models, and saying, and this is what it cost, and walked them through it. Giving them, good 360 view. And every time over the last, I'm going to say 3 years, that board of directors said, we want it all. Here's the money.
Right.
You go get it done. And it's funny because then this person's reaction is like, well, that's great, but gosh, now I got to go do all this stuff. And that's a lot. That's a whole lot of stuff that was in that package, all the way up to people really, wanting to take their leadership and, shake them on the shoulders and say, you're not paying attention. And this is going to cost us money, and because there's real risk out there, and we really have to minimize and mitigate it because we will not eliminate it.
I think you make a very valid point, which is you have some very educated boards that have very smart board members, and the people, I think in today's age, if you don't have a cybersecurity, information security board member on your board, you are missing a voice that's desperately needed on that board. And so if you're a CEO or you're a board member and you're listening and you don't have that voice, you really ought to start looking into getting some of those voices heard. Finally, Larry, so 35,000 members at TAG. You guys hear a lot of needs from your members. Where does cybersecurity rank there? What are some of the common themes that keep popping up in terms of cyber amongst your members? What can some of our listeners who may be cybersecurity vendors or entrepreneurs who are like, what's the next thing? They're trying to get an idea of market research. What would you tell them are some of the key things you keep hearing about?
So what we continue to hear about is, some people are at the rationalization and the realization that this is here, this is life, this is part of doing business, today and forever and ever. It's going to be part of doing business. Other people are they're like, just tell me what to do.
Right.
How do I manage all this? I'm running this business. I love what I do, but I don't know how to do this. So how do I keep up with this? And, and it's a hard message to tell people that you've got to broaden your horizon. You've got to broaden your perspective. This is your job. This is a piece of your job, along with everything else, along with making sure that you make payroll and that and that you're a human resources expert and that you're a payments expert and everything else. You're now a
tax
cybersecurity
expert, a legal expert.
You got it.
You got to be it all, and now you got to have cyber as well.
That's right. And so part of it is having a set of questions that people can ask. So a lot of companies now have outsourced vendors for security. So making sure people are asking the right questions, that they are modifying it to their business models to the point that they could and should, that they're not managing to the minimum. So these are all things that people are concerned. People want, when it comes to technology, we look to technology to make our lives easier and to be more efficient, and for our business practices to be more efficient and to be more effective. This is a layer that has to be managed for us to really get the benefits of what technology can provide. You asked me earlier what industries are impacted, and it's all industries. Yeah. Digital health and FinTech, those are easy ones. But you know what? We just found the first real example. We've been talking for a long time about can a network be infiltrated from the coffee pot? Well, we've got the real example of a garage door now.
Right.
Can they go through the garage door and get to the whole electrical grid? These are all, and not, so there's is it theoretically possible versus has it ever happened? Well, we're starting to see more examples of things like this that are becoming real and theory becoming real, part of our real life. So, gosh, I just went from what is a company worried about all the way up to, do you need to worry about your coffee pot? So it's,
to kind of wrap this up, I want to be sensitive of time.
Sure.
We have listeners in 25 countries. Thank you for listening. Can people outside of Georgia get involved in TAG?
By all means.
What's the website they can go to?
Tagonline.org. Love to have you there.
So tagonline.org, tagonline.org, O-R-G. You can visit TAG. People from out of state can get involved in the Atlanta ecosystem. TAG's all enhancing. I mean, you guys do 2 really big summits a year, right? FinTech South and the Summit.
Yeah, we do 4 major events a year. So the Georgia Technology Summit coming up in March, then FinTech South. Those are very, very large events. We're due Converge. So Converge is really about this whole convergence of technology and innovation,
right,
and everything that goes along to it. So think about the matrix.
The inaugural summit was last month.
It was last month.
And it was a great success.
Yeah, focused on IoT.
Right.
But, a continually morphing, definition of what IoT is and how it impacts us. But it's really going to be it enables us to talk about a lot of up and coming trends. And then we even think about Excalibur. And this is a great one just coming up because it really celebrates non-technology companies that have utilized technology to solve a problem or provide a tool or an efficiency. And this is a great time for us to have this conversation about cybersecurity with those non-technology companies, because they have to worry about this stuff too.
So a great example of that, if you're listening, of a non-technology company that became technology, SiteOne Landscape, formerly John Deere Landscaping. They're an Atlanta-based company in Roswell. They went from $800 million to $4 billion in the last 4 years in revenue. Did 33 acquisitions. I had their CIO, Sean, on, and I had their CISO, David Black, on. And we did a whole series of CIO, CISOs. How do you work together? And so they took a company that had nothing 4 years ago in information security. Their idea of IT was email accounts, and have turned it into a purely tech company. So if you think of SiteOne Landscape, they move dirts and sell trees. And they're a technology company today by all means. And so great stories to be had here in Georgia. Larry, thanks for being with us today. I really do appreciate it, man. Thanks for hosting us at the beautiful TAG offices and the Georgia Tech campus, which is absolutely fascinating. And so tagonline.org. You can get involved no matter where you are in the world. TAG welcomes everyone.
You got it. James, thank you so much.
All right. Pleasure
having
having
a little fun these days. So
yes, we are.
That's fantastic.
Awesome. So stay tuned. We're going to be right back after this message from one of our sponsors. Thank you. The CyberHub Engage podcast is sponsored by CyberHub Academy. CyberHub Academy are cyber business operation experts, helping any size business operationalize cybersecurity within their organization, whether it be tabletop exercises, security assessments, or building a cybersecurity strategy. For more, go to cyberhubacademy.com.